Evening, Brian. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the work session of the City Council of the City of Binghamton, 6 p.m., 13th of March, 2023. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk will call the roll. Madam Clerk.
Councilwoman Rezanetti,
Present.
Councilwoman Riley is absent. Councilmember Friedman,
Present.
Councilmember Burns is absent. Councilman Strawn,
Present.
Councilman Scanlon is absent, and President Scringy.
Present.
All right, that is 4 here, 3 absent, Riley, Burns, and Scanlon.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Let the record show Councilman Burns is here. With that being said, we will move forward with RL 23-65, and I'd like to introduce whomever will be speaking on behalf of Police Chief McCuskey. We'll come back around to that one. We'll start off with RLs 23-66 and 68. Chief Gardner, the floor is yours. Good evening, Chief. How are you?
Good evening, Councilman. How are you? Let's see. Okay, 2366.
Floor is yours, Chief.
This is an ordinance to amend the 2022 fire department budget to fund over budget items at the year end. It's basically just kind of a cleanup thing for out of title pay, ambulance duty pay, office supplies, and uniforms.
Thank you, Chief. Council discussion. Seeing none, Chief, RL 23-68, please.
Okay, this is an ordinance to accept the state municipalities grant for the purchase of turnout gear. We were awarded $150,000 for turnout gear. You may or may not know our gear ages out at 10 years. And we have to get rid of it and replace it. And a lot of it is approaching that age. So this is very timely. These grants are kind of hard to come by, but this is through Don Lepardo's office, and we're very appreciative.
Chief, you need this one expedited, right?
Yes, please.
Is it related to a date for the grant or anything like that?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you, Chief. Council discussion. Councilwoman Freeman.
Thank you, President Scringy. Hi, Chief. How are you?
Hi. Councilman, how are you?
Good. Can you explain what actually is turnout gear? Like, what is this grant actually going to be purchasing?
It's gonna purchase like helmets. It'll purchase gloves. There's all special firefighting gloves. The coats and the pants and the boots are basically that's a set of turnout gear, and they run about $3,500 to $4,000 now a set.
Per set, you said?
Yeah. for
So that's one of each of,
one person. Yeah,
or
it's very
well,
ex-
2 gloves.
very expensive. About $3,500 to $4,000 for each firefighter.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Seeing none. Councilwoman Rezanetti.
Just wanted to say thank you very much for having us at the fire station just a few days ago. What a great experience. We appreciate the welcoming, and certainly feeling very proud for having any part to play in that. What a great facility, and just
Yep.
want to say thank you. Great job to all.
Thank you very much for coming down, and thank you for all your support of the fire station, and turned out very nicely as you saw.
Thank you, Chief. Congrats to you and the entire department.
Thank you.
That being said, we'll move on with RL 23-62 with respect to 183 Water Street and ask Rachel Priest to join us. Good evening, Rachel. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Thank you for being with us. The floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you. So this is a resolution authorizing the sale of 183 Water Street to the Water Street Local Development Corporation. That is the site that's being developed into the new parking garage next to Boscov's.
Thank you, Rachel, very much. Any discussion? Councilwoman Freeman.
Thank you, President Gurinji. Hi, Rachel. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Who owns this property right now?
The city.
The city, okay, so the city, even though okay, I'm so sorry. The Water Street Local Development Corporation, is that not a city, that is a city committee, right? Or I
Yeah,
don't know
so
if
it's
committee is
a,
the right word.
what they call a blended component with the city. So it's the LDC, which is kind of like the BLDC, same basic blended component structure with the
I
city.
see. Okay, so even though the Water Street LDC falls under the city of Binghamton, we have to actually sell it to that entity.
Yeah, so it's a sale for $1, and it just transfers the property to the LDC.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Rachel, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. That being said, at this time, we'll move over with RLs 23, 61, 65, and 69 and ask City of Binghamton Mayor Jared Graham to join us. Good evening, Mayor.
Hi there.
I guess we'll start off with RL 23-62. And Mayor, the floor is yours.
I'm Kelly Sullivan, and Senior Project Manager for Bergman.
Thank you, Helly, for being with us. Appreciate it.
I just wanted to give a brief
69.
overview and let our engineer professional talk a little bit more about this. But essentially, this has to do with the Memorial Bridge project. And what I wanted to emphasize is that the scope of what we're looking to get approved tonight relates to sort of a phase 1 of design community engagement, which is going to be critical as part of this process, and a lot of analysis, which includes traffic analysis of these intersections of that bridge to determine what is possible. The biggest thing that we want to get out of this first phase is, what do the numbers tell us about traffic flows, both pedestrians, cyclists, as well as vehicles, and what is possible for that bridge. We're not making the bridge wider, we're not making it longer, we're using the existing geometry, and we will be guided by the numbers. We're not going to do something that inhibits traffic to Lourdes Hospital, makes wait times unnecessary on Riverside Drive or Front Street. So this part of the process is really important to guide the future final design, which we'll conduct this year as well as part of a second phase. But I just want to make clear that that's what this is. Certainly, City Council will have ample opportunity to provide feedback, to attend these meetings, take the survey that we plan. And again, this is all in the goal and vision of reimagining the Memorial Bridge to be friendly for pedestrians, cyclists, and really slow down traffic and make it safer for people that are coming into the city of Binghamton, and specifically on the west side. So with that, I'll turn it over.
So to build on, phase 1 is tasks 1 through 3. So of the provided pamphlet that you had, we did provide all of the scope ideas based on the total project, but there were just so many different ways based on the decisions and the outcomes of these analysis and the traffic studies and whatnot. It was just basically, you couldn't really nail down the exact scope, and it was too broad. So also included in this phase is the community engagement portion. So we would hold the stakeholder meetings. We would also do this community surveys. We would also reach out to CAUD and get their initial input, as well as the SHPO initial consultation. So we can know what type of process and length of process and that SHPO is going to require. But based on this, we feel confident that this number, it includes everything that we will need to provide 3 renderings for the city to make that decision, preliminary cost estimates, as well as it's a good opportunity to look for funding sources. So at this point, you can look for the funding sources and apply, and then also adjust your engineering based on the funding that you're going to get, whether it's going to be federal funding, state funding, and they all have requirements. So that's why we chose this location for phase 1.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Council discussion. Councilwoman Resonetti.
Just a quick question. And how long are we looking at for this particular phase of those 3 steps to be completed?
Right, so it's probably about 4 months. Everything that is included in that is in-house, Bergman's able to do. We could try to get out and be a little bit more aggressive with it, but you're looking at multiple studies, survey alone, you know, to go out there and to do that takes about a month to get all the information back and input. Getting the utility information back, reaching out and having NICEAG respond and tell you where things are located. So about a 4-month process from project kickoff to having your concept plan.
And I think you touched on it a little bit. What will the community engagement or feedback look like?
Yeah, so we can provide like QR codes, which is the first step. So that way anybody can have like a certain, like we'll come up with the mayor and other stakeholders to have like survey questions. So that will just be a broad general, we'll put those out to local businesses, you know, to get basic input. We will have one community engagement. We thought maybe at the Roberson Museum would be a good location to have it, where we will have like a main event and invite people to come in person. We will provide the renderings and whatnot, and also like the landscape architect will come and a couple other planners will come and attend that as well. And then we will have one-on-one stakeholder meetings. So aside from the city, we will reach out to like the local people who are close by. So maybe like the people who own the student housing there, Roberson would be one of them, and see what it is that they're looking for in having this type of amenity close by. We are saying up to 8 stakeholder meetings. So those would be like one-on-one meetings. So survey, stakeholder meetings, and community engagement.
Okay, so just last question. And so when you do have the community engagement event where you're actually inviting people, so the stakeholders thing is different. So who do you invite for that? Like, how do you reach out to folks for that one? Who comes to that?
How do we advertise?
Right.
So, I mean, you can do social media, you can do flyers, you can also send out like student emails, because
Okay.
there's a lot of student housing that's local. Just word of mouth is big. On the Binghamton City website, we would advertise it on there. So there's lots of opportunities.
So unlike the stakeholders for more businesses or whatever that are close to the bridge, you're
Yep.
talking about expanding it to
To the community.
community.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank
The
you.
stakeholders is more targeted.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any further discussion? Councilwoman Freeman.
Thank you, President Kernji. All right, I've got a few questions. The first one is, how was Bergman selected? Was there an RFQ or an RFP for this?
Yes, there was an RFQ. It was whittled down to 3 shortlisted firms. Per the city charter, the chair of the Public Works Committee sat in on those interviews, Councilwoman Resonetti. And there was a scoring that was done, and Bergman came out on the top.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So my next question is that my understanding from reading this proposal is that the bridge is structurally sound, correct? That there's no infrastructure issues. This is just kind of, I don't want to say just aesthetics, because it is functionality, but it's not dealing with the core like structure of the bridge. Is that correct?
No, streetscape is a good way to think about this. Yes.
Streetscape. Yes. Okay. And my last question is that on page 18 of the contract, there's the summary of the cost estimate. There's a line that's just listed as expenses, and that's $22,000. Can you talk a little bit more about what is actually included in that?
Sure, and I can provide those expenses as well.
Okay.
It's basically pavement cores, asbestos testing, mileage and day rates for the people who are coming to do the analysis. For people to come down for meetings, because a lot of our team, you know, we're scattered throughout New York State, so we do mileage for that. But I want to say mostly it has to do with like transportation testing. so I can provide that.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah,
Thank you. Okay, so expenses are mostly transportation and testing.
yeah.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you for the information.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any further discussion? Councilwoman Burns.
Hello. Is this the only rendering or is there other renderings, other possibilities?
We just came up with one
Oh, I see.
basic design in order
yeah.
to kind of, introduce this project to the mayor. Obviously, this one isn't gonna work when we were, in our interview with, when Mr. Rusnetti. There needs to be 3 lanes. That's gonna come up, when we do our analysis, those types of things are gonna come up. So
Right.
this was just basically kind of
Okay,
giving you
yeah,
an
yeah,
idea.
it's, yeah. And, because looking at that, I thought a roundabout at Front Street would settle the people turning right and going
I
straight.
love the idea of roundabout, but I'm sure
Yeah.
selling it to a lot of people.
Right.
what is
right.
roundabout.
And also, well, if this isn't the rendering, it doesn't, what I have to say, but the 434 walkway, the pedestrians are going to share with the bicycles.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
There's
So
that.
in order for you to have your input, definitely be part of the stakeholder meetings. or,
Yes, I would love to be there.
Because this is the type of information that.
Yeah.
is captured.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other discussion? Councilwoman Freeman.
Thank you, President Scrungy. I was just wondering if we could, I can't really see that so well. Could you maybe hold it up or pass it around, please?
We've got digital versions of this
Okay.
that maybe we can send to the city clerk. Again, this was just one design showing a possibility, kind of getting people imagining what it could be. And they show it at night, during the day, different views. So
Alright.
it just shows you that there's a lot more space on that bridge than it seems because
Yeah.
of the 2 lanes of traffic in each direction.
Yeah, and I will say I have ridden my bike on that bridge. It's a little scary to do that. So I always appreciate a wide, healthy bike lane. All right, thank you.
And these are the style of renting providing with the.
Love the whole idea,
Yeah.
by the way.
I know walkability is a new kind of thing, but that can have more lanes than is in that picture, correct? Yeah.
And it will.
Okay. Thank you,
Yeah.
man.
We were obviously trying to show the.
Yeah, no, I
aspect
get
of
it's
it,
it's like
yeah.
a broad rendering. I get it. It makes sense.
Yeah.
But thank you, Haley. Thank you. Any other discussion? Haley, thank you very much. Appreciate you. Thank you, Mayor, for continuing to be with us. We'll move here to
Megan, are you doing these later or you want me to do them now? Okay.
okay.
Okay. Yeah, Megan's doing a couple other ones, so she can handle the Chiefs one.
Sounds good.
Just want to remind the city council, we sent out the email about the winter storm tonight into tomorrow. Just that information is really critical, getting as many vehicles off. So we're looking to get some significant snowfall, maybe the biggest storm of the season. So just want a quick reminder, you can push that info out. Any questions, you know how to reach me. Thank you.
Does the garbage get pushed to Wednesday?
Mayor.
That was Tuesday.
It's just going to be suspended for this week.
So we'll do it so.
do it the following
South
week.
side will be the following week. No garbage this week.
That's correct. And, if possible, if there are people that put it out, if there's
Yeah.
extra trucks for the rest of the week, they could look to do it, but
Yeah.
we're just having people hold tight on that for right now.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you.
With that being said, we'll move on to RLs 23, 58, and 59 and ask Steve Carson to please join us.
Was the agenda.
Good evening, Steve. For the record, let it
Hello.
be noted that Mary Ellen Callahan, president of the CDAC, is joining us as well. Good evening.
So a couple things are going on here. So we'll do the home ARP first, so I don't tie up Mary Ann's time more than it is. So due to the time constraint on getting this done to HUD by the end of this month, we're kind of pushing things. I have been CCing city council and the mayor's office, so everyone's kind of on board with what's going on, knows what's going on. Nothing can officially be approved on any of this until I think your third meeting in March, which I think is 28th or 29th. So that gives some time in there for people, if there's any issues or causes of concern. But regardless, the consultants presented to CDAC, which was last Wednesday, after they did a public hearing. There was one member of the public who made a statement. I believe that was answered by the consultant afterwards, but I'm not sure if that was answered fully. But regardless, the consultant then made a budget recommendation to CDAC. So at this point, I'll just say it basically. The consultant made one budget recommendation and CDAC slightly altered that budget recommendation. So Mary Ann is here to talk about the CDAC version. It's not different enough that you need a separate budget or anything like that, because it's just the CDAC, I hate to say just, it's the CDAC recommendation. The mayor's office was informed about the consultant's decision versus the CDAC and went ahead and said, okay, let's go with what the consultant's decision was. So I will pass this over to Mary Ann to talk about as much of the process as possible, as well as the difference.
Thank you, Steve.
Good evening.
Floor is yours, Marion.
I want to say first that my colleagues and I, we really grilled the consultant. We asked for definitions. There was a presentation that was given to us that stated things like TRBA, TBRA, non-supportive services. We asked him what all of that meant. We asked him what he meant by World War II buildings, era buildings. We really grilled him. And I think that most of the questions were answered either by the consultant or by Steve, who actually supplemented his information. So at the end of our very long meeting, we really understood what this was all about. And while my colleagues were not exactly thrilled that the priorities as they were listed, which were more affordable housing and other things, were not exactly, more affordable housing did not show up on this list at all. And we asked why, and we're told obviously that 1.9 million doesn't go as far as it used to. So we understood that. And at the end of the discussion, it was suggested that we might make a suggestion that we approve the budget as it is, and that if there were any money left over in administration and planning, that money we would recommend be used in a certain way. My colleagues wanted to be more specific than that. So they took $25,000 out of the administrate acquisition and development. I have to put my glasses on for this one. The acquisition and development of non-congregate shelters, which we have found has a broad range of definitions, and the TBRA, the tenant-based rental assistance. We would take $25,000 out of each of those line items and put them into two line items for not-profit or operating and non-profit capacity building. And that was the motion that passed. And basically that was it.
Thank you.
So,
Steve,
so
any
just
comment?
everyone's aware, the home ARP funding is specifically, in a nutshell, it's housing for individuals that are at risk of homeless or are homeless. That's the very specific aspect of this funding. So that's what it's supposed to be used for. But there are, of course, many ways to get to that end. The consultant did a survey. That survey is still open. We are still taking public comments. We've actually had the Continuum of Care involved with this to get their feedback on it. The consultant has reached out to multiple stakeholders in the area. So that's kind of where all of this came around to. So after CDAC made their recommendations, I presented both numbers to the mayor's office. The mayor's office said, you know, let's go ahead and go with what the consultant recommended. And that is the budget before you right now for the home ARP.
Thank you. Council, any discussion? Councilwoman Freeman.
Thank you, President Scringy. Hello, thank you for being here. So I do have a few questions. So I was able to attend the meeting. I was the one member of the public who said something, because y'all know I'll always say something. So my question or my comment, I guess, it was more of a comment that I brought up at the meeting, was that the tenant-based rental assistance makes me a little bit nervous, because I worry that there are probably situations where a landlord is asking for an exorbitant amount of money and that's why the tenant cannot afford it. Maybe it was an illegal rent hike or something like that. And so I was worried that the landlord is asking for an unreasonable amount of money and is then, and maybe their house is kept up to code and everything, but then they're given the money that they're asking for and it doesn't really fix the situation of the landlord asking for really more than they ought to be. And I know it's a free market. I personally don't think that privatized housing is the best way to go. That's a whole different story. But the consultant was able to explain that tenant-based rental assistance isn't always like a direct it's not like a gift or a donation. And I was also comforted to learn that landlords have to have their properties have to be up to code and functional in order to receive this assistance. It assuaged some of my concerns. I don't know that I'm sold yet on having the lion's share, the largest chunk going to tenant-based rental assistance. That's one hesitation I have. It's at least a better situation than I initially thought it was, but that makes me a little bit nervous. I'm not going to lie to you. So that's I guess a comment.
So can I assuage, your
Yes,
concern
of
there?
course, yes,
So,
if it's fun.
TBRA in many ways can be thought of almost acting regulatorily as the same as Section 8 housing assistance. And because of that, that ensures one is that the properties are up to a minimum standard, the HQS standards, which is not the best, but it actually can be better than many of the apartments in the area. And number two, properties must be considered rent reasonable. And this comes back to the market rate aspect of the housing. All Section 8 units are the same way, and Housing Authority has to abide by this as well, as do our Choto properties with how much they charge. So yeah, that's built into the HUD system that you cannot charge more than essentially the going rate for housing in the area. And then that is what is essentially subsidized, an amount between that market rate and the amount that whatever your program is, it says that you do have to pay, which I believe in most programs, including TBRA, will be, I think, 30% of your income has to go towards your housing. That's the reason they're getting assistance, is because more than 30% of their income's going towards housing. So we knock that back down to the 30% of the difference in the subsidy. So there is that inbuilt mechanic in there to prevent someone from gouging, like you're saying.
Okay, I appreciate that information a lot. That does assuage some more of my concern. I think that, the root of where I'm coming from is that I feel like the TBRA doesn't get at the root of the issue of like, okay, a government subsidy is going to a private lender almost. But that is helpful information, and thank you for adding that. So my question now is, since the budget that we're looking at is only the consultant suggestion without the change that CDAC suggested, if we do approve this plan, it would not have the $50,000 changed. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. I understand, of course, the consultant has some level of expertise, but I think it would be nice to have, the CDAC is comprised of representatives from all over the city, and I don't believe that the consultant is local.
No, they're based out of Atlanta, Georgia.
Based out of Atlanta, Georgia. So they certainly have some expertise that our CDAC representatives don't have. But I also think it's valuable to take into account the suggestions of the people that we have chosen to represent our district. So I personally would want to accept the budget as amended. That's just my personal opinion. I know it's not so much different. And just to clarify, it would be $25,000 each to nonprofit operating and nonprofit capacity building. Is that correct? That was the addendum that was, or the amendment that was suggested.
Yes, the amendment that actually passed gives $25,000 to the operating funds for a not-for-profit and the capacity building of a not-for-profit. And as a personal aside, I would like to say that I was the only person that voted no. There was one abstention. Everybody else voted for this. My feeling is that $50,000 is not enough to do anything. It's not enough to pay for a director's salary and benefits. So the person that made the motion indicated that this was a good faith gesture on her part to do this, and everybody voted for it except me, because I feel that our recommendations need to be very practical. And in my personal opinion, this one is not.
Mhm.
That's only my personal opinion, but I wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. Yeah, I wonder if, right, nonprofit operating or capacity building could be a supplement to a nonprofit that is already operating, rather than, certainly $50,000 would not be able to start a nonprofit.
And that was why the suggestion was made that were there any funds left over from administration and planning, that those funds could be also leveraged in that capacity. But my colleagues did not think that that was a good idea.
Okay, so one option that we as city council have would be to codify that. That's actually a question, not a statement. So with that, I guess that's
Councilwoman, are you asking with respect to the budget that we will ultimately vote on from the CDAC?
yeah, so my question is, one option we have is to accept the budget as is. Another option would be to amend it in the way that the CDAC passed. And a third option, my question is this a viable third option? Could we codify that suggestion of, if there's money left over in these lines, it must be allocated toward A, B, and C? Is that an allowable?
So, yeah, so good question on that. So just for process, bless all of the members of the CDAC and Steve for all of the work that they do, right? At the end of the day, they are a recommending body, so they will have that budget that they've aggregated based on all of their knowledge, experience, everyone they've talked to, public hearings. What technically happens ordinarily from that point is the CDAC's budget recommendation is technically a budget recommendation to the mayor's office. And then the mayor will review it and have his input. And ultimately, what we as a body get is the mayor's budgetary proposal based upon the recommendations that CDAC has made. And then at that point, that final draft version of what we get will either, as you said, A, be voted down, B, be voted for, or C, a proposed amendment could be made, and that would either be voted up or down.
Right, so would it be possible to codify an if then scenario, like if there is money left over from the lines, and you suggested the acquisition and development line, is that correct?
Well, the money that's being asked to change, to be allocated into, is the acquisition and the operating from the acquisition and the TBRA to those not-for-profit funding. The other suggestion was that if there were any administrative and planning fees left over. So there were two distinct
I see.
discussions.
Right, so the second suggestion is what I'm asking about. So if there's any leftover funds in the administration and planning fees that ought to go, the suggestion is that ought to go into which line?
Well, that was a suggestion and that was a motion that was not approved. But-
Right,
But the discussion was, because Steve pointed out that this city is very, very good at allocating and doing things with funding. 290,000 some odd dollars were allocated to that line. Steve indicated during the course of the whole presentation that there might be money left over because The city is very good at spending its money wisely. So that's when the discussion began about what to do about if we were going to make a recommendation to change this. Could we change it in that line? Should there be monies left over? Because I know that in the past we have done that. If there were monies left over or, non-allocated funding, we would recommend. And that's how that discussion developed.
Right.
If that clarifies that.
Well, almost. I think I'm not quite asking in the right way for what
Councilwoman,
I'm
may I
wondering.
for a moment? Or
Yeah.
is what you're trying to, the information you're trying to request is how would someone in this body codify that recommendation of extra funds in line X go into line Y? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, that's
Okay.
my question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the answer to that question is assuming for a moment that Mayor Cram's proposed budget 100% reflects what the CDAC moves forward at that moment in time, if you so chose, you could propose an amendment to the budget to move N number of dollars from line X to line Y. That would essentially act as an amendment to the RL itself. That would have to be voted on as a separate question. And then if that passed, assuming so, then we would vote on a motion for the budget as amended. But yes, as a representative on council, you do have the right to propose that amendment. Yes.
Right. So that situation would arise after the fact that we've discovered that we have extra money in that line, right?
Correct.
So-
Yes,
So
correct.
my original question there then is, there is no way to codify an if-then scenario. And I'm not saying I do or don't want to do that, but we couldn't as city council approve this budget with an asterisk saying, if there is money left over in administration and planning, this money must go to this other line.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So on a technicality, a motion like that wouldn't even need to be made because the way the process is laid out ordinarily, we are actually the last stakeholder that touches the budget. So you wouldn't even need an if then. You literally could just make a motion to say, I'd like to amend this budget to again move N dollars from line X to line Y, again, assuming that there were extra funds there.
Right.
What I don't want to do is I don't want this body to make presumptions of what the mayor's budget may or may not look like, because none of us have any idea, because he has to wait to get it from CDAC and then he'll propose what he proposes.
Okay.
So I would like to add one thing. This is a HUD budget, just as any other HUD budget. This is technically an amendment to an action plan from last year. Any changes and the way we could have it codified in our citizen outreach plan, any changes to the overall type of funding require city council approval, require public input of a period, I think, of minimum 15 days with an ad in the paper. All that occurs. So for example, if X amount is put into admin and I honestly, I don't feel that we'll spend 15% of that on admin, but we'll see. But if we don't, and then the mayor's office says we want to move this to somewhere else, we have to go through the whole process of doing an additional amendment to the action plan. Public feedback, ad in the paper, come back to city council saying,
Right.
take money from X and put it into Y. So this body would not be cut out of that process at all.
Right.
Right. Okay. So we can't say if this happens in the future, then this, but we'll see the budget after the money has been spent, and then we can see there is money left over. And then in that case, we could go through that process and move that out of the administration and planning line into whatever we deem the appropriate line.
If the mayor chooses to move the funds to
Right.
another line, then yes, we would go through a whole process to do an additional amendment to the action plan.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you for your patience with me. I do have one more question there was a table that I had a question about. On page 48 of the packet, which I apologize, I don't know what page of this document that is. There's a table of eligible activities for ARP money and the number of persons benefiting. These are all 2 or 3 digit numbers, and then crime awareness is 44,750 people. Is that like the whole? Can you talk more about what crime awareness is and how this number was arrived at?
Not presently. I don't have
Okay.
that data in front of me, but if you wish to email me, I can forward that on to the consultant for a little bit of clarification and then
Okay.
contact everyone and let you know what the change was or the reason for that.
Okay, all right, thank you. And that concludes my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any other discussion? Seeing none, let's move on to RL 23-59.
You can hang out if you want.
Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you. I believe this is an amendment to two previous grants from last year and this year for Tri-Cities Opera. We were gonna do 20,000 last year and then in 17.5 this year. So you're looking at 37.5. Originally, that was going to go into ADA compliance for Tri-Cities Opera. They were going to install a really nice ramp or possibly a lift chair to allow people to have additional access to their facilities. Unfortunately, the situation has changed slightly for them. They are now at risk of having severe damage to the building due to a roof problem. So my suggestion to them, and they were good with that. Originally it was going to be a much smaller scale, but it's become even bigger since then, was just simply to fix the water retention going in behind the one wall. This is now changed and it's looking at a larger project of approximately $300,000 plus. The funding can be moved over to this. It's not an amendment to the action plan, but it is a change in scope from ADA compliance to this sort of what is considered under CDBG rules, historical revitalization, which is not an LMI or LMI specific group that it targets. We can only do a certain amount of this per year. Doing this would still be eligible and they would still have to get the additional grant funding to do the rest of the roof. I do not believe there's any, I don't know of any other funding coming from the city to this. I have spoken with the executive director, told them to, please contact the historical office in New York State. There's a lot of funding that is available for this kind of assistance, but that 37.5 is still sitting there as an additional thing we can help them with, potentially as seed money for the rest of their grant funding.
Steve, on behalf of the first district, I want to thank you and your office for fast tracking this. I've been in quite a bit of communication with the executive director over at Tri-Cities as well. And also working on with them with options with the county as well as with the state, reaching out to Assemblywoman Lapardo and some others. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. Just to let you know, I finally got word back from SHPO and they're going to have to change the scope a little bit. But
Yeah.
since they're having to change the entire scope to include the giant hole in the roof, that's going to change everything a little bit. So this is not a project that's going to be done the next few months. It's probably going to be done towards the end of the year.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve. Council, any discussion? Councilwoman Freeman.
Thank you, President Skirnji. So I don't know if you can speak to this, Steve, but I'm wondering actually why Tri-Cities Opera hasn't spent that money yet on the ADA improvements. Is there a reason why
Yeah.
they still have that money to begin with?
Oh, it's one of those funny stories.
Okay.
So originally the money was going to be used for a separate project that was last year, 2 years ago. They moved on it too quickly. And I don't know if you've been here when I've talked to city council about agencies moving on projects, especially environmental capital projects that need environmental review. They moved before environmental review was done. So at that point, 0 HUD dollars can go into a project if you move on that, which is why I stress to my agencies now, pre-application and even pre-contract release do not start until I tell you to. But the money's still there. And so they were trying to figure a way to utilize it. The ADA compliance thing came up and we were pursuing that. But it was one of those ones where they didn't have enough funding from last year to do it. So they had just asked for additional funding for basically the year that started 2022. And that was granted to them. So that plus last year's would then be ADA compliance. And now we've got the situation where they're dealing with an environmental issue in their property, which is just, so you know, it is a historical property. It is registered, I think, nationally. It's the old Armenian Club.
Yeah.
Does anyone know? Okay. It's the old Armenian Club. It's nationally registered. So, unfortunately with historical properties like that, especially with, any sort of government funding, but they really should also with private funding, you have to go through a lot of loops. You got to make sure you use the right material and you get the right. So, yeah. So that's kind of the situation with it. So they've gone from we moved too quickly to we were going to do ramps, but all of a sudden this really, really expensive thing came up that could lose us a historical building if we don't deal with it. So,
Right. So if an agency starts moving before the environmental review, it disqualifies the project?
yeah, I did a calculation last
Okay.
year and approximately $400,000 in projects had to be changed or
Whoa.
canceled because of agencies moving too quickly. And that's an unfortunate thing. And I do try to stress to the agencies, please do not move, please do not move. It's just the nature. It happens. There's confusion. They get a contract, and they think it's good to go. The contract says don't move until you get an environmental review. I don't blame them just because so many other agencies have done this. I actually kind of blame myself for not stressing it enough at the outset. But now I absolutely stress it at the outset that I've seen enough of these to say, please do not hire your contractor and start work until you're ready, until I'd say it's okay, just because there's so many rules about that. But the environmental rule is always the biggest one.
Right. Okay, thank you for that information.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any other discussion? Steve, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate you. This time I'd like to ask Megan Hyman, the Executive Assistant to the Mayor, to join us for RLs 2361 and 65. Good evening, Megan. How are you?
How are you?
Good. Thank you so much. If you don't mind, do you want to start off with 65 for the general fund for Chief Sikorsky, or did you want to do the other one, the property first?
Sure, I can do 65 first. And then
Thank you,
along
Megan.
the same lines, I'll have Pat McGinnis isn't here tonight, so I'll have RL 2367.
Appreciate you. Floor is yours, Megan.
Okay, RL 2365. This is an end of year housekeeping item. It's sort of to balance the 2022 budget. It's increasing the lines for shift differential and for the field training officer.
Thank you, Megan. Any discussion? Seeing none, let's move on to RL 23-61. Megan, the floor is yours.
RL 23-61, this is for the city to accept the donation of 86 Farview Avenue. This is a wooded lot on the city's south side.
Thank you, Megan. Council discussion. Councilwoman Freeman.
Thank you, President Scrungy. Hi, Megan. How are
Hi,
you?
Councilmember, good, how are you?
Good. Okay, so you said this is a wooded lot right now, and this is currently a city lot, is that correct?
This is a privately owned lot. The private property owner is looking to donate it to the city.
Right, okay. That's right. I promise I read this beforehand. Okay, so how would the city benefit from having a wooded lot?
So I think the fact that it's wooded means that it's not any extra maintenance for our Parks Department or DPW. It's not a vacant lot in the sense that we might think about them. And the property owner reached out looking to get rid of it. I think it's just beneficial for the city to acquire it and be able to have control over it rather than a random person.
Okay, and this is not eligible for the side lot program, for example?
I don't believe that there are this is sort of in a wooded area. I'm not sure if there are any property owners adjacent to it that would benefit from like an extension of their yard. And those side lots are typically where we have demolished property, so they're level and no trees.
Okay. Um. Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Any other discussion? Seeing none, let's move toward 23-67. Megan, the floor is yours.
Okay, 23-67, in line with the first RL from the police department. This is the end of year housekeeping item. It is to balance the 2022 budget. There were a couple of recreation attendants that were hired for, I believe, summer programming, but were kept on to help the Parks Department with game day support. So working flag football games, volleyball games, soccer games. This is just to balance that budget.
Thank you, Megan. Council discussion. Seeing none, Megan, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your help. At this time, we'll review RL 23-64, general fund budget items. For tonight. Evening. How are you?
Well,
Thank you for joining us. Floor is yours.
problem. All right, yeah, this is another one of those budget housekeeping items from last year. And so this is to amend the 22 general budget for over budget item, which was caused by, again, a good friend COVID, which pushed back a lot of the civil service exams. They were canceled and pushed back to last year, so then which caused the backlog, and so the civil service assistant had to go proctor a lot more exams than was budgeted for in that year, a lot more exams. So that price tag was $497 to cover that. So that will balance the budget.
Thank you, sir, very much. Council discussion. Seeing none, thank you very much. RL 23-70, amend chapter 26 of the code of the city of Binghamton. Colleagues, as I pointed out at the last meeting, if you read chapter 26 of the city charter, which is the chapter of the city charter that deals directly with everything that is chamber related for the legislative branch, I had pointed out in subsection 26 that a very standardized practice that we have with respect to when we amended the charter a few years ago to allow a motion and a second to be conducted to hold over first read legislation to the next business meeting, making it second read legislation, that there isn't an explicit statement in the city charter that codifies the past practice of requests for legislation needing to be second read, that they have to be voted on when they fall into that second read status. Adding the statement in the request for legislation codifies that in the city charter. Colleagues, discussion. Seeing none, Councilwoman Friedman, please.
Thank you, President Skirnji. This is minor, but I wonder if the word shall ought to be the word must.
In terms of interpretation, must and shall are pretty much interchangeable. It's
Okay.
not may or could or may or would, or that those would be sort of wishy-washy. Shall is a must word.
Okay, so we are compelled to vote. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I actually like that word, but yeah, that was a great point. Thank you for that. it's stylistic, but I appreciate the logic of where you were coming from.
Yeah, I don't mind either way. If it means the same thing, I think it does, you know, we could go either way. The reason why I asked was because shall, in my mind, not being a lawyer, shall seem to be more of a suggestion. But legally, if they're interchangeable, then it doesn't
We can modify. it to
matter
must.
either way.
It's the same thing. They're
Okay.
interchangeable.
Councilman Burns, did you have something?
Yes.
Please.
Mr.
Thank you,
President.
Councilwoman.
So we're not changing anything as far as holding things over.
Nope, you're still allowed to hold something over.
It's, I make a motion, it's seconded.
Nothing
It's-
changes.
It's held over until the next business meeting.
That is correct, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All
I-
this does is codify the long-standing practice. It's like been 20 years that I've been here.
Yeah,
If you hold it one time, it's got to be voted at the next meeting.
Right.
This
But you-
just puts that in words that are very clear. I believe it's implicitly there already, that it comes back to the floor automatically.
Right.
And something that comes to the floor is either voted up or voted down. That's why it's on the floor. But this makes it very blunt. Like,
yeah,
And other, sorry, but.
So it's not
the-
something that's implied, it's something that's explicitly stated.
And the other way of doing it.
Yep.
And I think this happened with ARPA. We held it over, but then it wasn't going to be voted on. I think because it wasn't going to be. I think it's because,
there was an insufficient
missing-
number of
but-
sponsors.
but Tom then took his name off of it.
That
Yes,
is correct.
That
So-
is still.
And that is
by the
still
So
floor.
you can
allowed.
Still do that.
You can
Yes,
still
still
do
do that.
that.
You take your
Absolutely.
name off it before it's voted on. and then it's not voted
Absolutely.
on.
Even if it's already been held over, your sponsorship is your right as a council person. Yes, sir. So why don't we, for the clerk's office, Madam Clerk and Corp Counsel, if we could take note, if the word shall could be changed to the word must. I've been moved and I don't want to go. Any other discussion? Thank you for the suggestion. Excellent. That being said, really quickly, I'd like to make an announcement to council members. If you remember last week, I'm at our last business meeting, that there was a sign out issue which I took responsibility for with respect to RL 23-46, which was the discussion around amending the City of Binghamton Historic Design Guidelines, Chapter 7. That was the signage discussion, that we didn't have a sign out sheet. So I have that sign out sheet in hand. So I am passing that sign out sheet around now. Any discussion on that? That'll come around shortly. Okay, that being said, we have 2 RLs left, which are, give me one.
I'll be presenting those two, and I would ask that we go into executive session because we have to discuss some personnel issues
Yeah,
and potential litigation, and I want to,
so,
it needs to be done. in
so
executive
obviously, well,
session.
I'm sorry, Councilwoman?
I apologize. That's for both of them?
Both,
60
yes,
and-
that's
they
correct.
both relate to the same set of facts.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we will go into executive session and then come back out and close out. At this time, I'll entertain a motion for personnel reasons to enter into executive session.
Motion, go in executive session.
Second.
Do I hear a second? Motion by Councilman Strawn, seconded by Councilwoman Rezinetti. All's in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any of those opposed signify by saying nay. We are in executive session. We will pause the YouTube live stream. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Madam